We're glad you could be with us for this second of 5 online conversations hosted by the Foundation for Self-Leadership. Thank you for joining. Our intent here is to figure out together why and how we need to build sturdier and more sustainable connections among our people and communities. This would be important work, especially given the state of our society today. I'm Toufic Hakim, Executive Director of the Foundation, on behalf of our board and our associates who do all they can to move our mission of healing and well-being forward. I welcome you to a bridge between us. Before my opening remarks, please allow me to acknowledge today's solemn day in the US, given it's the 20th anniversary of 9/11. We painfully remember all those who perished, and we offer with deep compassion, our deep compassion, to all those who survived, those who rescued and involved in the recovery efforts among them, and all the families that suffered deeply. Our hearts go out to them and to all those anywhere in the world who have suffered from human-made or human-activated tragedies. We find ourselves, dear participants, at a time when the basic tenets that hold society together are under threat and fraying in the US and in many places around the planet. Sadly, we are living in a conflicted world. People's views and beliefs, values, visions, and mindsets around the possibility of a future that's shared and valued seem at least to be drifting further and further apart. Some are even questioning whether the very notion of a common good is even salvageable. Well, many of us want to believe it is and want to work all we can toward it. And here we have a choice to make. One, we can become passive bystanders, take a passive peek, casual peek around us, or even resist looking. Let things slide off, argue things away, and go by our daily routines as if nothing happened, to the extent possible, that is. Or two, engage with full vigor and or militancy, working with all our might to change the reality to whatever we want it to be. Or perhaps three, somewhere in between, where we can get involved with passion and dedication, yet remain open to other perspectives and be not too attached to resulting outcomes. And perhaps set up very strict boundaries around incivility and violence. And remember that the best outcomes are those that count and include others across many cultures and experiences. And just as importantly, to exhibit in all we do enough empathy and love. Yes, love. You see, what has kept the world afloat, in my humble opinion, dear friends, is not systems of government, but rather people and organizations working tirelessly behind the scenes, below the radar, to serve the greater humanity, to advocate for human rights, to actively pursue humanity-enriching services and solutions despite the noise and the threat and the drumming of battle, psychological, moral, and intellectual battle, political battle, religious battle. It is the proactivism of these people and organizations that have assured progress across human history. I'm reminded by a quote from Margaret Mead when she said, "Never doubt that a few thoughtful, committed people can change the world." And indeed, that's the only thing that ever has. So we're called upon, each of us, to contribute to the positive change, especially in today's conflicted world.
How, you might ask? Maybe first by facing our own conflicted world inside of us, a tumultuous world of extreme emotions demanding expectations, and rigid convictions.
And maybe awakening within us qualities that would help us heal so that we can notice and be sensitive to the other, see our own humanity in the other, understand our role in the interaction with the other, and behave, make decisions, and take actions that would contribute to the greater good. And a few questions remain here. How might our activism be devoid of dogmatizing and proselytizing? How might our activism honor the universality of the human core and value the nearly infinite variety of functions and shapes around it? And how might we balance fervent activism with deep care and compassion? This, fellow bridge builders, is the context for today's conversation. Compassionate activism promoting the common good in a